So I'll talk, I think a number of you, actually raise your hand if you're familiar with Crecimiento in general already. A few folks, actually less than the people who watched my talk last time, so maybe I put you to sleep. What about the people, what about Aleph, and you've been to the Aleph Hub and so on? All right, great. So I'll talk about a bit about the opportunity in Argentina at a high level, and then maybe I'll go deeper this time into what public goods funding has been doing so far in the Crecimiento movement and where to go from here and kind of how we could use public funding systems to both scale up the movement and to scale up activity in the region. So first off, and I'll blaze through this part just because a number of folks are already familiar. And for the folks who are not familiar, there's recorded versions of this that go in depth in more detail, so you can find those online. Argentina was at the top of the world at the beginning of the 20th century, like one of the top 10 countries by GDP. Unfortunately, a bunch of economic mismanagement brought Argentina down. Really, really terrible situation that has affected, 46 million people here, and and a couple of generations of people, and just in general, kind of like big regress. This really peaked with the massive degree of inflation. The US and the EU were freaking out over 15% inflation. Argentina had somewhere between 50 to 150% over the last 10 years. And it really peaked around 250% in 2023, which is absolutely insane. Like, you cannot save, like, the prices are changing every week, or in some cases every day. Immediately when you get paid, you must spend the money that day. People won't take credit card payments because they get paid back 30 or 60 days later. And by that point, the money is just not worth whatever they gave you. It's just totally different landscape. People can't really save for houses, college, all that kind of stuff. That drove massive adoption of crypto in Argentina because people need to move out of a super inflating currency into something that is not inflating. And so initially that was, into Bitcoin and Ethereum and other things. But then with the rise of stablecoins, then people just kind of like moved into stablecoins. Of course, people had been moving into dollars for like decades, but now they can do that directly with stablecoins. And just the scale here means, somewhere between 10 to 25% of Argentinians use crypto in this way, which is massive. It's like a huge amount of people in the country that use crypto and accept crypto and so on. Argentina also is like super stacked in terms of talent and building in crypto. There's a ton of Argentinian crypto companies, ton of builders. Unfortunately, most of these companies end up having to relocate outside because the economic conditions are not good enough to enable those companies to thrive. They have to then incorporate in Uruguay or the US or some other place. So for those of us thinking about how to warp economic landscapes and incentive structures and all that kind of stuff, just realize that all these economies have some incentive landscape, and people and corporations have to migrate from that economy to economies that are better. Like, they tend to do that, corporations especially. And so think of an evolutionary game where we have to create not just better conditions, we have to create top tier conditions in order to retain those organizations and companies and networks that are going to create a lot of wealth. And so, the problem with companies moving is that they move the capital base of that corporation into that other jurisdiction, and then all stakeholders or people that earn from that system or whatever, or if that people end up making money out of that, all of the kind of investment that is going to happen later, all of that tends to then have some amount of inertia and happen more in the economy that the corporation is homed in. And so the corporations moving just affects the local economy. And so as a country and as an economy, you want to be among the best economies in the world to then not only retain your own systems and corporations and so on, but attract others from the rest of the world. So economies cannot just improve. You need to provide a top tier environment. By the way, this goes for crypto protocols too. I see a lot of crypto protocols being like, oh, let's kind of like improve this set of things. And it's like, well, yeah, after you do that, that'll be better. But are you even close to the top? And if not, like, people aren't going to come. You can think about the whole builder funnel and the conditions here and kind of how to improve the each of these stages and so on. There's a whole range of economic frictions that Argentina has that could be solved by crypto. Crypto has been building all these kind of really cool financial primitives that could dramatically improve all of these kinds of frictions, everything from payments to saving to credit, mortgages, all of the stuff that we've been calling real fi in the kind of public goods community. Everyday economic primitives for everyday use cases. Things like corporate structuring, being able to get loans, bonds, selling equity, all of that kind of stuff, being able to invest in things. All of those systems work really well in crypto, could be applied to Argentina, and could then vault the economy into a much better spot. There's another big thing here that I'll flag and I'll come back to later, which is these kinds of networks and systems take somewhere between 5 to 15 years to grow. So if you don't have an economic environment that can let them thrive for that long, they'll have to move again. And this is where looking around and looking at the best top tier economies can be very helpful. That gives you a clear view into kind of really great structures that you can then apply and implement in your economy to then kind of be super competitive. Now, a big shift that happened is that Argentinians, fed up with the inflation, elected Milei, who's been bringing down inflation dramatically. Like a bunch of the policies here are indeed working and stabilizing the currency, stabilizing the economy in a bunch of ways. Now, it's a really difficult, messy process. There'll be a lot of like kind of you can't easily make some economic changes without kind of like causing a whole bunch of problems. So it's not all good news. However, this is solving the core inflation issue. And at least setting up a structure where a lot of different businesses and so on can thrive and can then grow and employ people and kind of create value flows and kind of improve production and all that sort of stuff. So all of this, and by the way, like Milei is like a super strong libertarian. He's like a libertarian economist. So he's super aligned with like a lot of the principles and values of the crypto community. And so that means that there's both an enormous amount of bottoms up adoption and a whole bunch of top-down support. In fact, right now, there's a regulation day happening at DevConnect where a whole bunch of regulators from lots of different parts of the Argentinian government are coming to talk with the Crecimiento folks on stage in DevConnect, talking about crypto and kind of like how to use crypto to improve Argentina. And so what the opportunity landscape here is for those of us who are, crafting incentive structures and building public goods and building these kinds of systems, we could be vaulting an economy like Argentina from its position today into being one of the top 10 or top 20 economies in the world. And that is possible using the capital markets of crypto and the primitives that we've been building. It just has to be kind of built and wrapped into good products and services that a lot of people can use. And this is kind of where builders like you come in. Like you can take either some of the products that you've been building and deliver them and deploy them into this market, or get super excited about one of these problems and systems and kind of like help build some of the stuff. So I think I'll just like blaze through this part because I think a lot of folks are maybe familiar with the movement. This movement started about a year and a few months ago. A whole bunch of us saw this opportunity and we're like, oh man, like let's just onboard as many people into this space. We had kind of these broad 3 goals around. I think you can see that. You can see like the bolded parts. So 5 to 10 million people on chain, make the startup ecosystem in Argentina 10 times better. But by the way, it's 5 to 10 million people more on chain. So go from 10 to 25% to like 35 to 40%. Because at that point, if you have like half the country in crypto, that would be massive in terms of the kind of economic and political shift that you could do. Like if half the population in a country are using crypto and prefer crypto systems, like that's a totally different landscape to operate from. We're talking about then being able to build a bunch of systems and tools and so on that then can solve large scale problems and have a lot of people that actually use them. So it's not just kind of like random small portions of the population in the edge in a country. It's actually a lot of people using the tools we've been building to solve everyday real world problems for millions of people. And then we also had like this long-term goal of figuring out this like 20-year stability framework. I'll return to that at the end. So when the movement started, we had the slide like this of saying, hey, we have to like enable a lot of participants to think about these problems. We have to enable startups that are working on this problem to grow and accelerate, like help them kind of progress faster. We have to enable people that are interested in building startups to kind of learn how to do that and kind of accelerate them as founders. It would be great to have some kind of like high density environment for like people to think about this stuff. So we created a co-working environment, like the LF Hub. and so on. So this is where that came from. And all the while, we have to do this with policymakers and government and kind of working with them and interacting. So this is like some snapshot of like the first Aleph that we held. Totally good without sound. It was just images. So we had this hub. We leveraged the pop-up cities movement that started in the crypto community to kind of build something like this, where we had hundreds of builders coming from around the world. We had tons of sessions to teach people about problems and share skills, all that kind of stuff. We got people working against the frictions. We even had a lot of policymakers have like a whole range of high-profile sort of visits and understanding crypto and so on. We ran a demo day for a bunch of the startups in the community and so on. So this is like a pretty big success. We also did things like onboard a bunch of merchants to using crypto and use stablecoins right away and get paid directly there. We used on-chain passport info, so everybody got an LF passport, and you could check into buildings using ZK systems. And then so this was really awesome. Then later, after that that year, we wanted to get all of crypto to come to Argentina, and we basically achieved that, which, thanks for coming. All of you are here as part of the plan. And this group has been catalyzing a whole range of investment in the ecosystem. We kind of loosely account somewhere between 15 million. The low band is kind of $50 million worth of value so far coming into Argentina because of that. It could grow into the billions by 2030 if we kind of keep this up. And so the scale so far is quite big. Around 10,000 citizens, thousands of startups in the ecosystem. Hundreds of those have gone through the acceleration programs. 1,500 builders in the hub every month. A whole range of ecosystem programs. And so this is where the public goods stuff can come in. So when we began, we had slides like this that showed, the builder's funnel and different types of programs that would be great to have. And we have a slide that had, was aspirational, where each of these boxes was an idea. This slide is a real view into all the programs that exist today. After a year and a half in, we have a whole range of programs across the pipeline to help and support builders going from just early ideas into building prototypes and systems and kind of getting mentorship and getting all the way to forming their thing and potentially incorporating a company and building a thing. So all of these are public goods programs that have been built by the Crecimiento community to support all of this construction. Now, in order to make this regenerative, so it's not just public goods funding that goes out from a specific pot of money, we need to be able to create some structure that takes some of that value over time, then feeds it back into the system. That can happen from either some of the equity of the companies that get built, or from other businesses that could be built around this community. The Crecimiento community has a whole bunch of ideas of what those potential businesses could be, because a lot of these public goods programs are kind of rate limited by funding, right? So the team has been super good at transforming very limited amount of funding into these programs, but really to reach the scale of GDP growth that we're talking about, to really achieve these very ambitious goals, we need to 5 to 10x the scale of these programs. And yeah, the numbers are huge so far. For those of you who are here in Buenos Aires and like it, I strongly recommend coming back in March when we'll have the next Aleph pop-up city. That'll also be a pretty great time. And if you're a builder starting to implement systems and so on, and you want a very focused, fun, exciting environment where you can kind of focus on building your thing, ideally close to communities that can really benefit from what you're building, then I strongly recommend that you participate in the acceleration season, which will be run April through June. And you could participate in the next Startup World Cup. We just had the finale yesterday. Cool. So this is kind of a view into all of the community. So I'll conclude by talking about one of the ideas that has come out of this movement that I'm most excited about, which is the idea of how do we solve this 20-year stability problem? The idea is to use a construction that has been used by a lot of nations in the last 100 years, and even longer if you kind of map it to kind of prior structures, which is the idea of a special economic zone with different rule sets to promote a specific type of business, but you do it in a sandbox way so that you can experiment carefully. And so that idea is to be able to use, a special economic zone. You can look at Seoul, Singapore, and Dubai as 3 different approaches or versions of this, where people used these kind of special economic zone ideas, implemented in different ways in each of these countries, but doing so in order to kind of drive this massive transformation in a very short amount of time. Dubai in particular has something like 50 different economic zones. Some of them are like specific buildings. Some of them are specific floors in a building. And it just creates an environment where some of the rules of the kind of parent jurisdiction apply, but then they get to kind of, shift the structure to a different kind of environment within the boundaries, the geographical boundaries of that zone. However, we're in crypto, in like a digital environment. So why not create a digital economic zone where instead of having a physical boundary around the environment, you can create a fully digital structure for this. And that's where a blockchain can be very useful. A blockchain is like a self-contained transactional processing system. It's kind of like a jurisdiction in a box. It already has things like smart contracts. It already has like basic economic primitives. You can reason about trade into and out of the blockchain because you have bridges going in and out. So you can like totally model all of the economic conditions of a blockchain as a jurisdiction in one of these kind of special economic zones. So there's a possibility here of creating a whole set of new 21st century forms of foundational economic primitives on top of blockchains by kind of binding them with this kind of like 20th century idea of this special economic zone structure. And so like that's one of the ideas that has come out of the movement that we're most excited about. And the cool thing here is like you don't just run one experiment like in Dubai. You can run a bunch of these and try tweaking different parameters to see which ones actually end up working better. And if some of those like work super well, then you can scale those rule sets and apply them to the rest of the country. And separately, you can run this could be a blueprint for doing this around the world, right? So being able to do this in one jurisdiction or in one location gives us a set of primitives that we can then take on and apply in a whole bunch of other locations in the world. Just think about how many countries, like we're talking about Argentina today, and this is like, all things considered, above like over 150 other countries that have dramatically worse economic conditions. And so this could be like a massive driver for global change in terms of the structuring of systems, the provisioning of goods, and really creating regenerative economic systems. And so I'm personally super excited about this idea. It's kind of like the coolest thing that has come out of crypto network states sort of community. It's just there's a lot to build to get this to work well, and a lot of projects to experiment with. Cool. The project that is, so a year ago we had this idea of maybe we turn Aleph into like an on-chain city, and what does that look like? And right now there's a project now called Andén, which is kind of what has come out of that set of ideas. So join the movement, come hang out, go check out the hub while you're here. And happy to answer any questions if we have time. Otherwise I can bail. Yeah.
How any one place that better slow down work always in delay? How also this is riding under the AI space?
So I would say that it's a great question. Let me return. Well, no, I want one return. So what I would say is like the Milei administration today has put in place a set of rules that enables crypto to thrive. And so you don't actually need any other change like an economic zone to already succeed in fixing a bunch of the economic frictions. All of those products and services that I talked about can be built already with just the basic rules set changes that Milei put in place. However, to establish the long-term shift, like that 20-year stability, that's where the economic zone comes in. Because historically, and Argentina is not alone in this, there's a lot of countries that have done this, you have this like super problematic pendulum swinging of economic policy that not only do you not have like excellent conditions for these kind of systems to be built, but the changing of rule sets creates such unstable ground that then groups have to leave. Like it's just not in practice something that you can take on to actually like survive in an environment like that. And so lots of economists have pointed out that like the most fundamental principles that you need in an economy is long-term stability and not rocking the boat constantly and not changing things constantly. And so an economic zone can give you that. That's kind of one of the great benefits in, and we've seen that happening in lots of parts of the world and all over Asia and in the Middle East and in some places in Europe. These kind of economic zone structures can give you that long-term stability, independent of who ends up in power or in winning the next election. And so this is what I see as like, I don't know how much support there's going to be for this kind of idea in the current kind of like policy space. My sense, because every kind of government always thinks that they're thinking kind of like the now in the immediate, and they're thinking about like, great, like now we get to apply our policies. And the hard challenge is going to be them thinking about how do we upgrade the system and put in place a structure that protects a set of principles in a scoped way into the long term to be able to do these long running experiments. And this is one of the things that I think the UK got super right in the last 150 years, 100, maybe 200 years. It created certain structures that had long-term persistence. And this is what gave you places like Singapore and Hong Kong. It just kind of, those locations today are benefiting from those kind of longevity-oriented perspectives, even though, there's been tons of political upheavals and changes throughout that entire time. And so I think that this idea of the zone is like crucial for the long term. But you don't actually need it to get going in the next 4 to 8 years, right? So like all of the builders can like just do their thing, and then we'll see like either things will improve, or then those companies and products will just like relocate somewhere else. They'll still operate in Argentina, so probably they will still fix the economic conditions. But whether or not Argentina can retain that wealth creation depends on the long term stability.
Touch on the main purpose of the special economic zone? Like, is it primarily regulatory sandbox? Is it tax incentives for startups?
So there is, good question. So there are a set of tax zones already in Argentina, and there are a set of other incentives. From my perspective, like, sure, those kind of things can help, and they can help improve conditions to some degree. But in practice, what I think is the most important thing is to establish that longevity, that stability. It's saying like, whatever rule set you end up picking, sure, you should make sure that rule set is good and competitive with the rest of the world. But there's a lot of ways that you can slice that. The harder question is, can you create a structure that people can really bet on and commit to, and where these companies can grow in, that isn't going to completely change in 4 or 8 years? And so that to me is the biggest promise of this kind of zone structure. There's another idea that is percolating in the community, which is like, oh man, once you have AI systems be super capable, they're going to be building corporations on their own, and they're going to be able to generate a bunch of economic activity. And if you have these like digital economic zones, you can enable those kind of AI corporations to thrive in those environments. And like that's a whole other like can of worms, and like a whole we could spend like another conference talking about. But these kinds of structures might also enable experimentation in that direction, and so that's another thing that could be driven from a digital economic zone on a blockchain. But that's like I would encourage carefully approaching those experiments carefully and understanding kind of really bounding the box of like how they're able to interface with the rest of the economy, so that ideally you can create a lot of value, but you aren't kind of letting that sub-economy affect the surrounding economies too much before you can really understand kind of like where they're going to head. But that's a whole other idea. That's not quite what you asked. The core answer to your question is like that long-term stability. Turns out that like tax incentives are like helpful, but like not that big of a deal relative to whether or not the whole policy change is going to shift. In the middle.
This is, you say location, you say zone. There's kind of a lot about geography, and I thought for a long time that geography was a really missing piece to the Web3 vision. I'm curious what you're thinking about buying location-based services.
Yeah, so I really should have a map of the economic zones in Dubai. It's just fun to look at. You have like a map of the city with like 50 different like little circles. And like, if you go into that building, you enter a new economic zone. Or like, if you go into that building and you go to like the 53rd floor, that floor is the new economic zone, right? Like, if you don't like those laws, don't get off the elevator there. But like, that's kind of bizarre, right? Like, it's like, what? Like, really, a whole economic zone on a floor? Like, that's kind of weird. From my perspective, it's like this removing land as a requirement and finding some way digitally to lasso a bunch of economic activity and establish strong boundaries between that economic activity and everything else is the core innovation here of like creating a digital economic zone. And so now you can make that economic zone global, or you can make that economic zone be associated with a particular location. And so in this particular case, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about in the community has been about Argentina specifically and the conditions in Argentina specifically. So that would be kind of like a zone for locals here and for like international businesses that could come and do business in Argentina. But you can take this entire concept and apply it to other countries or other cities or global, right? Like some of us were like, oh man, what if you could like use this digital economic zone thing and launch a satellite into like put in like one of the Lagrange points and have like the first, space jurisdiction. Like pretty neat. Like definitely checks out in the sci-fi timeline. We're like getting close to that. So we could do that. Somebody let me know how much time I have. Otherwise I can get off at this point. I think there was a question back there first. Yeah. Yeah.
The novel in the agriculture would this all people calling.
Yeah, so I'm not saying so maybe I'll answer the second question first and then the first one. So I'm not saying just look at those other jurisdictions and try to copy them. What I'm saying is when you're thinking about improving economic conditions, you can't just look at what you're doing and then try to do it better. You have to look around and look at the best economies in the world according to a set of criteria that you have and learn from them. And that shouldn't just be 3. You should be looking around to lots of others and draw learnings from those and then decide what you're going to implement. The reason I picked those was because they showed a dramatic transformation in a very short period of time. So those are 3 examples of countries where in a 30 to 50 year timescale, you had a huge shift in terms of the economic structure of a particular country. And also those 3, I didn't show this, but those are three cases where you can look at comparable jurisdictions, comparable countries that had similar types of economic conditions when that clock started, but because the rule sets were different and the amount of international business they were able to do was different, they had totally different trajectories, right? The extreme case is like North Korea and South Korea, but that's maybe you could say like very different situation. You can also look at like the UAE versus Qatar or Oman or some of these other locations where the UAE was able to go way faster into this improvement relative to the other countries, and in some cases doing it with a fraction of the oil wealth than the other groups. Like for example, we mentioned Venezuela earlier. Like the UAE has a tiny amount of oil relative to Venezuela. Venezuela is like the richest country by far in the world in terms of oil. It's just like the management of that wealth has been totally different. And so yeah, it's like. And then Singapore and Malaysia, like Singapore got kicked out of Malaysia. Singapore ended up having to like reshape itself. So that's an example of like then Singapore applied a different set of economic structures and primitives and decision making, and then ended up in a totally different spot. And so I'm not saying copy those things exactly. I'm saying learn from their ability to learn from the rest of the world and decide what are going to be the crucial economic primitives that they need to, and policy primitives they need to put in place to then be able to have a top tier environment. Because it's only when you have like a truly top tier environment that you can both retain and attract a lot of the production and value creation activity that kind of make these countries extremely wealthy relative to some other counterparts. And in terms of like what we hope to achieve, So the first part of your question, what do we hope to achieve? We think that like if we can put in place that longevity, the long-term structure with a pretty good rule set and the ability to experiment where you can keep evolving and improving that rule set, either with different economic zone experiments or something like that, that could create the evolutionary landscape that would enable Argentina to find a best fit condition to create that wealth and to retain that wealth. And so like that's the hope. Yep.
Usually no special economic stocks, the operator, but infrastructure, SEZs. Hey, I was the under thinking about.
Yeah, good question. I haven't been thinking that much about it. The Andén team has been thinking about that, and they've been looking at other zone operators to understand kind of like the businesses and structures that they're putting in place. A lot of it comes down to like running registries, like running corporation registries and identity registries, and like you need some like adjudication of like disputes. You need like there's some basic transactions costs. All of those, you know, I think the team had like this whole spreadsheet analyzing a whole bunch of zone operators in other parts of the world, looking at like their business models and how they operate. They're good businesses. They're not like amazing businesses. You know, like if you're looking for like a fantastic business, I wouldn't say that's the best. Like the best business is like go make something entirely digital and like, you know, sell a digital product into the market. But they can be a good sustainable business that operates and supports the whole thing. Having a zone operator is more about like having the structure and the work to support and enable it. But really the wealth creation is probably going to happen. Like if there's wealth creation involved, it's probably going to happen inside of that jurisdiction, much more so than like operating the thing. From a public goods perspective, there's an interesting question as to like, you know, do you apply the same kind of tax regime on the other tax zones in Argentina, like the tax-free zones? Or do you actually introduce some tax that you go to funding public goods in that system, and ideally the rest of Argentina. Like if you can create a structure that ends up then creating like all this public good funding that then like just spills over to like the rest of Argentina, that could be amazing, right? You know, think about like if you were able to take, you know, a small percentage of the value creation on something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, and then those like scale to tens of trillions or hundreds of trillions, and then you're able to route some of that funding to like public goods broadly, like awesome. Like that would be pretty cool. I think there's a lot of like experimentation to do here. And my sense of how do you succeed here is that you run multiple of these, not just one.